Hello, gunfighters, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and gun-related stuff the right way with God at the center. Gonna try something a little bit different. You guys are probably familiar if you've listened for any length of time. The Better Know a Cartridge episodes. They're kind of short episodes on a pretty particular topic, so I think I'm gonna forego the lengthy bio. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Professional big game hunter and guide. You want more? Check out the link in the show notes. Bam. With that, let's roll into the 375 H&H Holland & Holland Magnum. I'm going to say it, a legendary cartridge. How have we not talked about this? And we've talked about a bunch of other cartridges and we haven't talked about the 375 H&H. But tonight, after reading some Bible, I opened up the Cartridges of the World, a gift from a patron. And I was looking through different cartridges thinking what I might talk about. And the 375 H&H came across me flipping through the pages, and I thought, yeah, that's it. That's the one. Because it really kind of is the one cartridge that can pretty much do everything as far as hunting goes. Period. I don't know if there is any Magafauna on the planet that has not fallen to the 375 H&H. Anywhere where large and dangerous game is a thing, come across these accounts of the 375 Holland & Holland. I just double checked to make sure because by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses a matter is established. And it is indeed, as far as I know and as far as my research shows, the first Magnum. The first Magnum. It would be notable if only for that reason, but it wasn't a flash in the pan. It didn't just come and go. It's still going strong. In fact, I was recently looking at Alaska rifles. A lot of rifles you'll see touted as Alaskan come in a 375. The 375 Holland & Holland, again, where dangerous game is a thing. Where big Magafauna is a thing, a 375 H&H has, I believe, a well-deserved reputation. And this is back in 1912. Should ring a bell in firearms history. It's a year after the 1911 came out. We're talking pre the United States entering World War I. The automobile had been on the scene for less than 10 years, and I have to believe was pretty uncommon for most people, to give you a time frame. Teddy Roosevelt had left office 3 years before, to give you kind of an idea of the time we're talking about here. And out comes a 375 Holland & Holland. And this is from that book. Long considered the best all-around African caliber, the 375 H&H is overpowered for North American big game. However, many Alaskan hunters and guides prefer it for moose and grizzly bear. It isn't a very flexible cartridge for the American hunter, unless one expects to hunt the heaviest species and spend time in Africa or Asia. John Taylor, in his 1984 book African Rifles and Cartridges, rates the 375 as the best medium bore for African hunting, and it's his candidate for the most effective all-around cartridge. The cartridge is the basis for H&H's later 300 H&H Magnum, that is, and therefore is the great-grandfather of most all-modern belted Magnum chamberings. It can certainly be said that it inspired the entire genre. Now, I don't know that I would call it not flexible for American hunters, especially Western hunters, Montana, Idaho, places like that, and especially they mention Alaska. You can always load it down if you hand load. And if you're talking elk, moose, black bear, and brown bear, I think it's a fine cartridge for that. I'm generally not a go big or go home kind of person on rifles. In my professional hunting and guiding days, I used a 243 and my 6.5 Creedmoor the most, and I've hunted very successfully with those, even out west. But I don't knock on guys that actually can shoot and control the recoil on these guns well. And I think it can be flexible, again, if you hand load. But if you wanted a one single gun to hunt anything Magafauna wise in North America, I'm talking, I was going to say deer, but probably wolf is certainly on average smaller than deer. Wolf on up to moose would be the heaviest, but probably the most dangerous would be, a Alaskan coastal brown bear. But anything in there, the 375 will do it. And if you were willing to hand load and you wanted to load down some rounds that weren't crazy for, whitetail or a mule deer, it would certainly do fine for that. I've even seen loadings for very reduced power loads, and I've seen people shooting those, and it seemed like not overpowered at all. So if you wanted, you can always load down, and it'll certainly give you the higher end of the spectrum for power on any living creature that you're going to be able to hunt. There might be some African countries that have a bigger than that for some animals minimum. I'm not really familiar. The only real exotic animals I have much experience with are the ones I've hunted that were brought here to the U.S. as a professional hunter and guide. I'm not really very familiar with different African countries and laws. But again, I would be surprised if there was a beast, a large animal in Africa or Asia for that matter, that hadn't been killed with a 375 H&H. It's got the street cred, to use modern vernacular. Now let's look at some real world numbers. And I'm going to start with factory loads. And it lists a 270 grain at 2690. That's very respectable velocity and a big beefy bullet. It lists a 300 grain at 2530. If you want a rough estimate of foot-pounds, it's in the mid, 4,200 foot-pound range. That's 4,000 and something. Give you an idea, just roughly, a 9mm, common 9mm loadings are usually 300 and something. A really hot one may break 400. 400. We're talking 4,000 to give you an idea of power. I do see some lighter loadings down to the 200 grain at 3,200 and a 220 grain at 2,300. So when it says it's not flexible for North American game, I look at those numbers and I see, if you go on the heavy end of 30-06, you can launch a 200 to 220 grain bullet. And the same manual lists a 220 grain 30-06 load at 2,400, and this lists a 220 grain load for the 375 H&H at 2,300. Now that's not a factory loading, but if you hand load, it tells me the potential is there. Is that overkill if you're east of the Mississippi? Yeah, I think it probably is, but out west, I don't know that I would call it overkill. For that guy that spends long hunts out in the backcountry in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, it wouldn't be the worst choice in the world. And certainly, we talked about Alaska and Africa. Now I'm going from the same manual. We recently did an episode on a 9.3x62, which is storied and legendary in its own right for big and dangerous game hunting. And it lists a 286 grain at 2,500. And the Holland & Holland lists a 285 grain, so 1 grain difference at 2,700, to give you a rough idea. And that's the heaviest bullet I see, at least in this manual, loaded for the 9.362. The heaviest grain in this is 350. It's got a 350 grain option at 2,400. It's a big bullet. Quite a bit more than 286 grains. If you're interested in this cartridge, you want something maybe a little bit more efficient. So if you don't know, this cartridge is a little bit longer than what you would consider your standard calibers, your long action 30-06s. It's even longer than that. It's not going to fit in many common rifles. However, if you're interested in this cartridge and you want something that'll fit into a standard rifle length action, you may look at the 375 Ruger. Pretty much as I understand it, now people that love this cartridge may get upset at this, but pretty much is the same, with a more modern, more efficient case. If they can do the same job with less powder because of more efficiency, it should give you less recoil, which in a round like this, I think is a big advantage. So you might look at the 375 Ruger. If you're a Steyr fan, there's the 376 Steyr. If you want to take a little step down, but nothing crazy, you might look at the 9.3 by 62. And Weatherby also makes a 375 Weatherby Magnum. And a 375 Remington Ultra Magnum. Because when Magnum's not Magnum enough, you go Ultra Magnum. But it looks like a fine cartridge. And to be fair, both the Weatherby and the Remington Ultra Mag look like a decent step up in velocity in this bore size. So you may take a look at any of those cartridges. But the 375 Holland & Holland, if you want to hunt big and dangerous game with a legendary cartridge that has some history, you might take a look at the 375 H&H. Anyway, men, with that, I appreciate you. I am humbled that you give me some of your time. If you've thought about supporting the podcast, you might want to consider going to Patreon. Especially this month, that's January in the year of our Lord 2023. We have a Patreon giveaway going away of a really cool knife, the SOG Bushcraft, and a sling bag. Becoming a $5 patron will get you entered into that. But more importantly, it'll help out the podcast. If you think you got $5 worth of value out of this podcast, I'm not just talking this episode, I'm talking about the podcast, or this one, an Alpha Male and Simple Man Sermons, you may consider supporting. I am very thankful and humbled by all the current patrons. By God's grace, to many more to come. With that, the tactical verse of the day. The words of Jesus, the Gospel of John. But now I come to you, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have joy fulfilled in themselves. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. Whatever your next desired hunting destination is, remember your final destination on bended knee, facing judgment. There is only one name by which men can be saved: Jesus Christ. Remember, men, what's really important. And have a blessed day.